Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what is making the headlines with the political editors of The Guardian and The Sun, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole, both with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to both of you. So to the front pages then, let's take a look, shall we? Starting with The Guardian, it leads with the Prime Minister's speech tonight in which he heavily criticised the reaction of the Chinese government to recent protests there. According to The Eye, Rishi Sunak could soon preempt a rebellion from within his own party by lifting the ban on onshore wind farms. The Metro cites Sky News' interview with the Ukrainian First Lady Olena Zelenska, who has condemned what she alleges is the systematic use of sexual violence by Russian soldiers in her country. The Financial Times reports that the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, has insisted it will not hesitate to continue raising interest rates, even though the pace of inflation does appear to be slowing. The Daily Mail again describing Sir Keir Starmer's plan to impose VAT on private schools if Labour came to power as a class war. The Times reports on the new online safety bill, which it says will make social media firms protect young people or pay the price. The Express claims an exclusive with news that the NHS is paying millions of pounds to treat people abroad and ease the pressure on waiting times. The Star has divided loyalties in tomorrow's World Cup match between England and Wales, simply saying, come on. Well, on that same story, The Sun opts for a pun, do or die. While the Mirror 2 makes the big match its top story, Pride and Passion. There we go. Well, a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out all of those front pages while you watch our guests. So let's bring them in then, shall we? And join Harry and Pippa. Welcome to both of you. Pippa, why don't you kick off then with the Guardian story and this idea that the golden era of relations between China and the UK is heralded, we remember, by Mrs. Cameron and Osborne, is over.
Yes, it was very much a reflection of the sort of language that they'd used previously when they were in power. This was a speech tonight at the Guildhall by Rishi Sunak, which has been billed as his first big foreign policy speech. He's only been in office for about a month. And despite the fact that he has done a couple of trips in that time, he's been to Ukraine, he's obviously has met leaders at the COP27 summit in Egypt, and he was over in Bali at the G20 summit where he met not just Biden, but was supposed to meet Xi, although that meeting was cancelled at the last minute. He still hasn't really fleshed out his vision of what Britain's global position should be. We know very little of it. He was Chancellor for 2 years and most of his focus was on the economy, particularly as a result of cost of living crisis and the pandemic. So tonight was the moment where he spelt that out. And much of the focus on his speech has been on what he said about China, this era where we had really quite sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily friendly, but certainly sort of constructive relations with China under Osborne and Cameron appear to be over. And it's particularly interesting because Rishi Sunak had a bit of a reputation when he was Chancellor among some of the Tory hawks towards China on his own benches as maybe being a bit softer in stance towards it than they were, because obviously his priority was sort of the economic aspect and supply chains, and China obviously plays a major role in that regard in the across the globe. So he was very hard line after that during the Tory leadership contest, talking about China representing a threat. Obviously, he was up against Liz Truss, who herself had said that the UK's foreign policy would formally classify China as a threat. And then now we have a sort of another iteration of that position where he said, yes, his golden era is over. He's criticised the creeping authority of Xi Jinping. He's sort of defended the civil disobedience of people on the streets of Beijing and Shanghai and the assault on the BBC journalist. But he's described China as a systemic challenge, which mirrors the language that the US national security strategy used, but stopped short of calling it a threat, which of course he did in the summer. That inevitably will sort of set the hairs running a bit and cause some more jitters amongst the hawkish Tory backbenchers. But clearly his focus is on the economic ramifications of the relationship between Britain and China.
Yes, pick up on that, Harry, but also reflect on us. You know, this is a man who, as Pippa said, has only been in office for a mere week. So what do we know about his aims and ambitions and how he wants to, run his foreign policy unit. For example, he talked about resetting relations with Europe as well, evolving our wider post-Brexit relations with Europe, including engaging with the new European political community, not talking about alignment, but having a mature, respectful relationship with Europe. So there's that, isn't there? The EU and all of those issues. There's Russia. We know he's been to the Ukrainian capital only recently, and obviously the China stuff we've already talked about.
Yeah, I think the problem for Sunak here is that actually we can only really go on what he said himself about his foreign policy views. And they were, I'm old enough to remember when his campaign team were accusing Liz Truss of being soft on China, and in fact, Rishi being the more hawkish. And so it was quite stark that he hasn't got as far as he went in July 24th, where he said China is the biggest threat facing this country, even bigger than Russia. And we should, on day one of my premiership, we will reflect that. Now it's day, I don't know, about 36 of his premiership. And we finally come around to talk to it. And he's a million miles from where he was in the campaign. He's also Liz Truss promised a big review of British defence policy. And that was something that Rishi Sunak said he would do by the end of the year. It was expected, because that's going to actually set things like the defence budget, things like security spending for the next 5 years, which will all be haggled about in the run-up to next March's budget. Now, he's kicked that into the long grass. That's now not going to come to the new year, he's confirmed tonight. So there's a little bit of a feeling of actually he's sort of slightly treading water here. He's buying his time. He doesn't want to go too far one way or the other. He's completely lashed himself to the Americans' viewpoint, as you said. But the Americans at times can be very hard line on China, and actually Britain ends up playing second fiddle and having to go along with decisions like stripping out Huawei from our communications network. So it's quite a dangerous game to play, to just say, well, the Americans have said it, so therefore we're going to say it, because the Americans might use that as an opportunity to go, well, actually, we think this, and this is this as well. And you end up there going, well, actually, we disagree. But so it strikes me as a slightly rushed speech that he didn't particularly want to give. He spent the whole weekend briefing the papers that he was going to be cracking down on small boats this week, having fixed the economy apparently in the last couple of weeks. And suddenly we got a very late drop of this speech on Sunday night. We've got a very late final version of it, almost as he was standing up this evening. And you wonder whether it was slightly written by committee. He didn't want to go too far either one way or the other. And it's slightly sort of beginning to sum up his premiership so far, is that he's actually incredibly risk averse, doesn't want to upset anyone. And you wonder, well, that's just management. That's just technocratic government. Will voters want a little bit more than that?
Yeah, or it's diplomacy, isn't it, when it comes to foreign matters?
Well,
that's the point, I think.
Yeah, but let's not forget that, China are beating up British journalists on their streets tonight, and all he could basically say was one throwaway remark about that. They're clamping down on Hong Kong. They're threatening Taiwan. They're burning people alive in buildings because of their zero COVID policy. What does it take? What more evidence does West need that China is a threat?
Yeah, but part of the problem is that Chinese lockdowns are having a major impact on supply chains around the world, for the very reason it's quite hard to buy an item without part or all of it being made in China. So this trading partnership is it's a de facto reality, isn't it, for the world and how they deal with human rights. Look at the front page of the... Go on, Harry, then, yeah.
No, God, I'm eating up all the time, and Pippa and I agreed last week that we're going to have a truce on talking too much. But that is the problem of 12 years, of 15 years, of 20 years of British foreign policy, is that China have got us right where they want them. Where they want us, something has to break. And so far, you've got people like IDS saying this is just a return to Project Kowtow.
Yeah, he's been very stark tonight, has he not, Ian Duncan-Smith? Problem is, China produced cheap goods when the world did not want to, I suppose, and, we live with that now. But reflect just quickly, if we can pack in some other stories as well. The pictures we see on the front page of the Financial Times, there is a bravery about these protests because China has very strongly organised facial recognition. They don't need to be there to arrest people. They can subsequently do it. We've seen with Iran as well, protests, and now across parts of China, the bravery of people who do not live under a democratic state, Pippa.
Yeah, it's a very striking picture there. I'm not sure if you can see, but it's a bank of Chinese police and officials and a protester holding up a blank sheet of paper representing censorship, which of course is one of their concerns, that they're not able to speak out. But ultimately, these protests, which, the most sort of civil disobedience we've seen on the streets of cities like Shanghai for decades, are about China's zero COVID policy. And basically what's ended up happening is that local areas have had very, very extreme shutdowns, even if there's just one case of COVID. And there's some concern that the vaccine that they use isn't as effective as it is in the West. And that's why we're seeing, by comparison, look at the World Cup, there's crowds of thousands of people all crowded in together, not wearing masks, getting on with life as usual. Whereas in China, there's really sort of severe restrictions still in place. And it's, these local lockdowns, if the zero COVID policy continues, cover areas which represent or which produce about 2/3 of China's GDP. Can you imagine the impact if those lockdowns continue on global supply chains and the economy? But if they remove all the restrictions and lift it suddenly, then we go back to this very sort of familiar territory that we've had in the UK over the past couple of years of the Chinese health system being overwhelmed and then potentially national lockdown being imposed. So, the government got itself into a bit of a mess as to how it deals with it. But this is years on from when the virus first emerged, and you'd thought that the country might have been able to get to grips with it by now. Understandably, people are extremely frustrated by these very draconian restrictions that are being posed on their lives, much more draconian really than anything we've seen, and are coming out to the streets to protest. And it's really quite considerably, as you mentioned, very, very brave of them when you consider the sort of a response that we've seen in the past to these sorts of civil protests.
Let's move on to domestic matters, shall we? And two stories here. The first one is the online safety bill, which was there to literally crack down on online harm. Everybody cried free speech. It's a little bit like Twitter, isn't it? Where they all these people to monitor output, and then Elon Musk bought it. But anyway, it's being brought back, isn't it, Harry? And your paper says this is a victory for free speech.
Yeah, the ongoing saga of the online safety bill, which I think has been going about, I've been writing about it for 4 or 5 years now. It was being drafted, and then it was going to lock up, Elon Musk's and Mark Zuckerberg's of the world if they didn't play ball. And then it's, actually, no, we can't do that. We'll just fine them. And then they tried to go too far the other way and say, well, actually, things that you could say in the pub, if you were to then write them down on Twitter, they would be legal to say in the pub, but illegal online. It got sort of bogged down in sort of, as you say, sort of free speech issues. Now, they have resurrected it. It was sort of looking like it was going to go away under Liz Truss. Rishi Sunak vowed in the campaign, one of the vows he's keeping, unlike lots of the other vows he's dropped, to ditch that legal but harmful clause, which was upsetting a lot of people. There is some good stuff in there, basic age verification checks for social media firms, putting the onus onto the firms with the threats and sanction of large fines if they don't do it. At the moment, you can just, go on Instagram or Facebook or one of the others, say you're 13 years old and that's that. The onus will be on the firms to check that, something parents have been calling for a long time. Big fines for not deleting pornography, terror content, things like that. All the things that, for so long, the governments across the world, actually, and governments around the world will be looking to see how we do this, because we're one of the sort of pioneers on this. There's lots of other countries with similar legislation in the pipeline to see how the big firms react to our bill before they implement their own. For so long, government has been saying to tech firms, sort this out yourselves, or we will have to do it for you. And it looks like finally the government have realised that they could say it to their blue in the face without the threat of a big stick hitting them where they hurt in their profits. Nothing was going to change. Let's hope this does actually do something, because there are thousands of parents, millions of parents out there who are concerned. Lots of parents out there who are grieving from the lack of control of what's online. And if it actually happens, we can finally go and write about something else. But it's been a long time to making this bill.
Yes, and the suggestion is there'll be a greater requirement for firms to provide adults with tools to hide certain content. So, you get those algorithms that build up what you see. So, Pippa, I'm sure you want to talk about that, but do you mind if I move on? I know you've got children who that would affect. But anyway, just finally, quick story in the eye too. Wind farms, onshore, who's for it, who's against it, and why's it got the government in a pickle?
Well, Rishi Sunak's been scrambling to find a compromise today on onshore wind. There's this backbench rebellion, yet another backbench rebellion growing about it. It was obviously a policy which Boris Johnson initially wasn't much of a fan of onshore wind, but has changed his mind. Liz Truss said that actually it was essential to growth, so she decided that we could have onshore wind. And Rishi Sunak says, no, we're much more interested in offshore wind, and we couldn't possibly have onshore wind unless it has, if it doesn't have public consent. If one person locally objects, then forget about it. And there is a rebellion led by Simon Clarke, the former Levelling Up secretary, and now about 50 MPs, including some quite high-profile ones, including Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Alok Sharma, the former COP president, all backing it, saying that this is ridiculous. If we're going to be looking at energy security in the round and we want to make the most of renewables, then onshore wind has to be part of that picture. The problem Rishi Sunak currently has is if he agrees to that and sort of bends to their demands, then he's going to have probably an equally large number of rebels on the other side that don't agree with onshore wind. And he's already facing rebellion on this Levelling Up bill over planning over housing targets. And those people presumably would represent some of those that would not be very happy with onshore wind. So he's once again trying to sort of tread a really difficult path through the different factions in his party. Yet another area where the Conservative Party is looking quite divided. And, he's trying desperately to sort of be the sticking plaster that holds it together. But I think as time goes on, that sticking plaster is going to fray, not just over onshore wind and renewables, but all sorts of other issues. And we're going to see, really, despite the fact they're kind of keeping their counsel for the most part at the moment, more and more issues where Conservative MPs decide that they want to speak out.
There you go, diplomatic path at home and abroad, it seems like. It's his job currently. There we go. Anyway, lots more still to come, including a wee story that caught our eye in The Sun, discussing the novel way scientists plan to monitor new diseases when we come back. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Pippa Crerar and Harry Cole from The Guardian and The Sun, respectively. Welcome back to both of you. Harry, look at the papers. A lot of looking ahead to Tuesday night and that crucial game in Qatar. The Daily Star with a simple come on with the captains there. Quite a moment, certainly.
Yeah, I think some of our features team, our sports teams have been looking for pubs on the English and Welsh borders today where I think there used to be one that the actual border would almost divide straight down the middle of the pub. But an incredible moment. The country will stop tomorrow, I suspect, grind to a halt, certainly for political journalists like Pippa and I. It's been nice to let the sports teams and the showbiz teams and the features teams take a bit of the slack after a mental 6 months. So as long as England stay in the World Cup, the more Pippa and I will have to put our feet up and do some Christmas shopping. So multiple reasons to cheer.
Brief respite since it's been busy since 2016, I think probably is how I would describe it in the world of politics. The Sun as well, do or die. That's the same for the Metro. It's do or die. Pippa, I know it's not necessarily your team right now, and I apologise for that, obviously, for all Scots fans watching as well. But very crucial game for Wales, clearly, to keep them in.
It is, and maybe I'll have to support them out of Celtic solidarity or something like that. I certainly haven't quite recovered yet from the England-Iran game when England fans were chanting at the Iranians, "Are you Scotland in disguise?" after they lost 6-2, wasn't it? So I think as a result of that, I think I might have to support the Welsh tomorrow. But let's see. No, I mean seriously, I live in England. My husband's English. My children are half English. I think I will do my bit. And maybe won't be shouting the loudest, but I will be willing them to. I will be willing them to do well. If the underdogs Wales manage to beat them, however, then I won't be too disappointed either. Yeah,
we all love an underdog, isn't we? It's the ilk of being British, anyway. A quick look at the paper in The Sun. Bog Brothers watching Lou. You might have to explain, Harry.
Well, look, I can explain quite how long we spent on that headline, which was quite a while this morning. But no, Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, gave a speech today where he was slightly chatting away at the end of it in Q&A, and he's sort of started to freelance a little bit on all these ideas that have come across his desk, including microchipping urinals, so that people go to the loo in them, and new technology now so advanced that actually it can analyze your urine and tell you if you've got a disease or an illness way before you're showing symptoms. And he says down the line, with the right conversation with the public, you could get to a stage where early diagnosis is done in a world like that. I think it's some years off. I think there are massive civil liberties arguments to have. But the interesting point
Harry?
he made, actually,
You're
is
going to have to stop
we gave
there.
everything to Facebook anyway.
I'm so sorry. It's a half explanation. We'll see you later. Harry and Pippa, thank you very much indeed.